by all means, stick up your hand, say something. I'll repeat the question back to everybody, and we can carry on. So first slide. Just as a point, academics are forgiving souls, and they're often very humble. But there's something about being called Mr. Orwell that I don't like. Maybe it's all that time I spent writing a great big thesis and getting examined on it or something like that. Maybe it's because I don't get paid much and so that's my only reward. But if someone's got down on their signature, or you happen to sort of find out on the internet that they're Dr. Orwell or Dr. Smith, then don't write Mr. Orwell or Mr. Smith at the top of your email. It just starts things off on the wrong foot. Right. Anyhow, here we go. So this is where we go very quickly, okay? And so for the benefit of the film and so forth, I'll try and do justice to what we've got here. But this is what we're going to talk about. What is a user story? How does it fit into that whole agile development thing? This cycle of estimating and scheduling and rewriting stories, getting more detail, getting more variations on the story. And then a little bit of critical analysis on this as a something. I want something else. Just treat that with caution. And then we talk a bit more about detail, a bit more about this expanding family tree that we can generate of stories, and then we kind of move on to your content. And if we run out of ideas, then we'll look at mine. So I've kind of done all this already. It's pretty much self-explanatory. A user story is a few sentences of plain English that describes the sequence of activities that will be enabled by the associated development activity. So you are going to do something so that somebody, your granny, your auntie, your uncle who runs a mechanic shop, or someone can sit down, do something, and that's enabled by what you're doing. Okay? So its essence is user-facing. That's its very roots. It's about the user, okay? And it's preferably written by them. If not, then it's written in language that they can understand, that they can read and say, yes, that's what I want, or no, that's not quite right, okay? So it's a process that enables validation by the user. But it's a lovely bridge between the user and the developer, because what the developer wants is some kind of spec, okay? So it may be a fairly high level spec, but the crunch is that it must enable a low risk estimate of the time needed to implement the story. So I think that will take a week of my time, or 2 weeks, or it'll take 3 days of 4 people working on it. So you can enable, it's this estimation of the, and then, in order for that bridge to work, it must be verifiable. There must be some kind of, the user and the developer must be able to say, yeah, well, that's done now. We can tick that off the list. That works, okay? And or it doesn't work. Look, the user says there must be some basis that will enable this to be examined, and we can at the end of the development cycle we can say whether or not this story has actually been completed. So this is this is a very trendy area of project methodology, sort of agile, Scrum. Everybody's compliant with this now. Everybody works here, but it's and I'm not an expert, okay? And so I'm not an expert in the later stages, but I can give it to you as I see that user stories are the start of this process, and then what happens is that everybody gets together, they do this estimation, they prioritize the stories with the users. You work out what's going to be done first, and you work out exactly what it is that makes it accepted. When do we have a story that will be accepted? And then you sprint. You go away. All the developers go off, maybe in pairs, and do this programming for a week, 2 weeks. Get something. They've got that card physically on the front of their keyboard. They can, and so that each day they come in and say, this is what we're working on. It's not too big. It can be done within a week or two. And then at the end of that sprint, you have everybody gets together, and the plan is for that sprint to be successful. Obviously, sprints are sometimes unsuccessful, and you've got to work out how you're going to deliver something at the end of your scope. And that, what can you throw out of the balloon in terms of your programming so that when you get to the end of your sprint, you've still got something that demonstrates something useful to the user. And that's, of course, if you encounter profound and impenetrable problems in your programming, your development, then this isn't a magic bullet that will enable your project to succeed. This is just a means of harnessing what you can do most effectively. Oh, by the way, and then it all goes around again. And so you've got somewhere, and then you have another look. The user says, well, actually, things have changed a bit. I think in the time available, we're just about to get taken over. So really, this is now the priority. Do something else. Do like this. And so this is exactly why it's agile. I mean, it's probably very obvious to most of you, but if you're not sort of the very agility of your project methodology is demonstrated through this iterative re-evaluation of what's important, okay? And so by definition, your first project plan is open to change. Things might change, and that's embrace change. That's the sort of philosophy. So here's just some ideas. Ideally you should be between 1 and 3 weeks. Each story should be implemented in like this, and it needs to have a priority. I think it's very useful to get so in terms of what your story consists of. We talked about 3 or 4 sentences in plain English. That's the guts of it. That's the most important bit, the real juicy inner goodness of it. But on top of that, you can have a title, a short descriptive title, and maybe that's in the, as a user, I want to buy a book on the internet type sort of template. And I think it's nice to have a little code. And so you could have like R1, R2 for like reading type user stories, U1, U2 for updates, etc. So you could have R2, logged in user, views whole itinerary on a single page. Okay, so that's a nice handy handle for that user story. That isn't the user story. That's just the title for it. And then the story and the whole set, they can be edited. So you can they're there to be improved, and so they're a living document, as I think some people sort of talked about. So now we just quickly talk about this. Was mentioned in the previous lecture, so I'm going to go quickly. If you Google user stories, you get that link that I put in blue on the top line, and it sounds very much from that perspective as if that's the beginning and the end of it. They're your user stories. As a user, I want to be able to view a list of books by a certain author on the internet, on a web page, or whatever it is. As a user, I want to do something so that it makes me feel happy. And I feel that this is a recipe for sloppy and unverifiable thinking, because it might work as a title, but it doesn't work as the actual body, because nothing happens. It's just an aspiration. It doesn't actually express a sequence of actions that somebody can say, look, before we have the pizza, Mr. User, I'll show you what you wanted. There you go. It's happening. And so it's not sufficient by itself. And so I'm saying that we can expand that on the very bottom here, and due to this lovely new projector, which I think is fantastic, you can actually read it, which is more than we can say than the previous case over at Townhouse. Sorry about that. But here we go. I'm already logged in. I select my itinerary for this trip. It shows me all the bookings I've made for this trip. If there are multiple people, they are listed together for each part of the trip. If it's too big for one page, then I can scroll down using my normal control to see the remaining parts. Okay. Now, there's a few things to talk about there. First of all, use of the first person. Okay, makes it a little bit more real, believable, emotive, personal. I want this. I'm going to do that. Okay, and that's fine. It's great. Keep it like that if you like it. Or if you don't like that, you prefer the more scientific. The user wants to see this. The user clicks here and clicks there and so on. Second thing, there's a bit of detail there that's probably the consequence of some discussion. So the developer says, well, look, sometimes you're going to have too much stuff to fit on a single page. What do you want to do? Do you want next page? Go back to the user. The user says, no. Scroll down, please. I just want it all on one page. And so that's reflected in the story. Okay. That's and so forth. And then we've got a code, a title and a heading, a code. So the detail is it helpful to establish the acceptance criteria? I have read user stories that sound more like personas. Say, John is a 34-year-old architect with a mother who lives in Basildon. He likes cats and music. And you go, no. We don't need any of that, okay? We just want to talk about, what they want to do, And so it's stripping down the detail to enable everybody to agree when they're eating the pizza that that's been done or not, okay? If you have too much detail, then it constrains the developer, or dev, as I've called them for short, okay? So saying phrases like select my itinerary is preferable to click on the itinerary link because, I'm sure you all use smartphones and say that's not always possible. Likewise, don't go in and say, this will add another entry to the database table or something like that. Don't make any assumptions about what's going on behind the scenes. Just give it to us as the user wants in terms of what they can see and feel. It's a very much a sort of, sort of logical positivist, really. And background detail we've already talked about. So what we're sort of expecting is that, at this stage of your project, you might be developing a couple of core user stories. So this is some sort of magical kind of travel agent, I suppose, project. We haven't really given it a name or much detail, but you can imagine for something in this space, you might start with 3 key stories for the kind of reading and the writing, the update and the viewing, and so that would be your basic ones, and then you can spin off these more complicated ones that maybe address certain issues, bugs in the system. Maybe the user tries it and they can't do anything that spans a year. So they say, right, damn it, I'm going to put in a new user story, and that is the priority for next week, is that I can book when I fly in December and I come back in January, and that all works. And so that goes in, and the user says that, or the client says, that is the priority. B4, please, before anything else. And so that's up to them to manage, in conjunction with the project manager. And then you've got more details over here. These might be extensions to the scope. The developers, wait. You never said anything about being a printable view. That wasn't in the original scope. Well, it is now. R4, a printable view of the itinerary, please, because they've realised that wasn't part of the original spec. So that goes in at a high priority, for example. So that's something that I think in your capacity as a final year project student, it might be nice to keep a sort of, you could keep a sort of not a backlog, but a sort of revision history of these. So, your October set of user stories might have looked like that, and then your November set looked like that, and then your December set looked like that. and then in January it was all done and tested, and the pizza was eaten, and the user's happy, and all you need to do is write it up. Here's a few more. I don't think there's much more to mention here. I think this hierarchy is interesting to consider. So, you could have a user story which basically does the whole thing. I know there's one student that's got a mind-controlled car. So there's a hand up. I'll take in just a second. So there's there's one project that I'm aware of where they use the headset to control a car. So the user story is he puts on his headset and presses a button, and then he can think about where the car wants to go, and it goes. Done. Lovely. One story, one project, simple. But obviously that's the whole caboodle, isn't it? And that's going to take a lot of careful development. We talked about the training, we talked about the configuration and all this kind of thing. And that will come out in more detailed user stories. But maybe it's nice to have that grand story visible to the various stakeholders, because that's just, we all agree that that's actually what we were, where we want to be going. I think I've talked about this. This is really more about the Programming 3 user stories, because in Programming 3 I ask you to write some user stories and I will mark these, and those are the sorts of criteria. And it's all very good to, 1 and 2 are just about in a box, but I think fundamentally your job as computer scientists or information systems scientists is to keep it real. And so if you come and give me some user stories that can be implemented, and can a programmer look at them and implement them, but they're just total nonsense, I mean, they're not actually useful, then I think you've somehow let yourself down. And so you need to sort of keep that sort of core understanding of in what sense a user would really use what you're developing, and how that would be beneficial. So can I take that question at the top now? Are you meant to make user stories from use cases? So use cases is a shorthand for use case scenario, and this is a more formal methodology that's used to denote the interaction of a system with some users. And often you have little diagrams with arrows and boxes coming back and forth. And I guess I would probably try to give 2 answers to that. Okay, I think the first answer is that in some ways they are intended as a replacement. They're intended as a replacement. So rather than adopt use case scenarios as part of your project artifacts, you instead, as an alternative, can use user stories. And the advocates of user stories would say they are more usable by the users. So if you have a meeting with some person who's not a computer programmer, not a computer scientist, and you say, look, this is what we're going to be doing, and you show them some little diagram with UML boxes and things like that, they go, oh, okay, I'll have a look at that, and they probably won't. I mean, it's tricky for them to get familiar with what you're doing. This is intended, user stories is intended to address that problem. I think the second answer would be, I would actually turn it the other way around. I would say, if your programming team would prefer to see a more formal statement of interaction, then it would be possible to develop the use case scenario in the appropriate diagrammatic form from the user story. I wouldn't develop user stories from use cases. Ibrahim.
Okay, just to add some suggestion to this. I thought user story was for requirement analysis.
Yes.
And the use case is used for design. When we deal with the UML, for example, like designing use case class diagrams and
yes.
Sequence diagrams. So generally speaking, the user story is for the requirement analysis, and the use cases is for UML approach and design.
Yes. I think we agree completely. And so one project methodology will just dispense with UML and say you can go straight from user story to development. And another project methodology would say, exactly as you said, that you would take the user story as a requirements artifact and generate some design artifacts, which would be use case scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of methodology, I mean, in my honest opinion, I don't think there's a real methodology that we approach because everyone will be taking their own methodology. And to be fair, no one can say that I will use agile methodology because it's not in the real situation that we're in. Because
I think that this is not a real project in the sense that that many project methodologies assume, and so in some ways, yes, you will always be simulating certain aspects. But I'll move on. So this is my new slide for the kind of and so if you look a bit further, and in fact this is a Wikipedia link that's at the top there. This is a set of sort of criteria for user stories, and I think this is fairly. We can quickly talk through them. So they should be independent. There's no inherent dependency on another user story. I think that's an aspiration. You can always. We can talk a little bit more about that. Obviously, if you say there's a logged-in user does this, that, and the other, there is a dependency on maybe the login user story and maybe the forgotten password user story. But there's an aspiration there that tries to make these different stories independent. N stands for negotiable. And so that means that this is just reflecting something I've been emphasizing, which is that they are up for discussion with the stakeholders. Valuable. A user story must deliver value to the end user. Again, I think my slides beforehand have made that clear. Estimable. You must always be able to estimate the size of a user story. How many weeks is this going to take? Small. To try and keep it. And again, I guess here, my comments about the utility of the big picture user story are in direct contradiction to that as the requirement that they are small. And so, I think we are still in the business of juggling these different things. Luca, shush. We're juggling these different requirements. We'd like to get a big picture of what we're about. This seems to be within scope for the user stories, but at the point of actually doing these sprints, we want stuff to be small. And T stands for testable. Must provide the necessary information to make test development possible. We all know what that means. So I've got 3 things to share with you. And so I thought what we'd do is we'd do a quick run through of the first, no, I've got 4, haven't I? 3 from you and 1 from me. We'll do a quick run through of the first 3, okay? And then we'll return to the first one, and then maybe we can make some notes, on these slides, and that can be there for posterity. Okay, so the first one, I can't find the actual title to this project, but it's basically a show data on real map project. By a real map, I mean something like the map of a world, or the map of Europe, or something like this. Rather like Google Maps, I suppose. A map, a web accessible map. And so these are the user stories that have been contributed to this particular case. And once again, thanks to the infrastructure team for making that readable at such a small font. So we've got a small business owner wants to see where he's selling. We've got a student wants to see the total population of each country in a document. He wants to display the resulting cumulative population for the continent. And then a person wants to learn the names, capital cities and flags for all the countries by viewing them on an otherwise empty map. Okay. a law teacher needs to show students a map of what legal systems all the countries in the world are based on. Napoleonic, common law, that kind of thing. A traveller, doesn't say what sort of traveller, wants to highlight all the countries he has visited on a map. He also wants to add stories and pictures for each country he's visited to use the application as a travel diary. So that's a bit of a can of worms, I'd say, that one. That one's got trouble written all over it, I'd say. 6, a financial analyst has generated numerical data for each country in the world in Excel and wants to display the data on a map. He's lots of different data, so he wants to be able to easily toggle between displaying different data. Travel blogger wants to add an interactive map, each visited, pictures, country, etc. Sounds a bit like 5. Maybe you're running out of steam a bit there. But no, that is, we have a surfeit of stuff to think about here. There's all kinds of interesting things that are suggested by these stories, but I would also suggest that there's a few deficiencies here. But we'll do each one in turn. The next one is a recipe map. They're all map-based, but the first two at least are very different to each other. The next two are a bit more similar. Okay, so a recipe map project summary. Okay, so what we've got here is like maybe a web view of some recipes, and the idea is that you can put in a recipe. Either it might be a BBC cookbook recipe, or maybe your own that you've got that your gran wrote down on the back of an envelope for you. And this program, or this application, will take the recipe and it will plot it on a map where you're using the ratio of ingredients to say where it is. And so, for example, you can talk about the amount of fat per 100 grams of flour. Fat's not a very good word. You could say butter or olive oil, but it's all basically fat. But the amount of fat per 100 grams of flour and the amount of sugar per 100 grams of flour. And so bread would be down in the bottom, and then chocolate sponge or something would be up at the top. And so you can see where, what's similar and different. So this is a picture is worth 1,000 words, and I won't give you the 1,000 words. Maybe you'd have read them all already. But that's what this project is about. And then they did say that they gave me their user stories, but I really only found goals and objectives and problems. Okay, so this is all their text. So the main goals are to find an effective way of ingesting the recipes into a database, to have a compelling and responsive front-end design, nice phrase, to have a simple interface that makes it easy for them to find recipes and input their own recipes. An objective for when the project is complete is for recipe portals to actually use this tool. Okay, and then you've got some problems too. But we don't have any stories. So anyway, there we go. That's number 2. Number 3 is another map, and in fact it's quite similar to number to this one. And I didn't have time to dig out a picture for this for the beer mat. But the idea is that instead there's 2 main differences. One, it's not food, it's drink, it's beer. And the second thing is that instead of it being an actual geometrically calculated difference between the different things, so this might be bread, and just because this might be, say, focaccia, because it's just got a bit more olive oil, so that we can understand exactly. There's a simple calculation to decide what goes where. The idea with the beer mat is that you can take in people's preferences. I think those 2 beers are similar. I think those 2 are not similar. And also you just take in the words that are used to describe these beers. Beer's becoming very sort of, it's almost like wine these days. You can talk about, these craft beers, all these sorts of words used to describe it. And so you take in all these words, take in all these user preferences, and we generate a map of beer. But because we think we're clever, we're going to call it a beer mat in sort of acknowledgement to the other use of that word. And so that's what we've got for beer mat. And so we've got information provided by the beer makers and information provided by the beer drinkers that will enable us to make a nice visually compelling graphic that can be used by people with an interest in this trade. And these are the user stories that are presented for this. And so there's there's a requirement for system stability. There's a requirement for a manual insert of new beers, so that, you know, new beer comes, put this in. As a project owner, I want automated data insertion so that I can save time and resources. As a project owner, I want access restrictions so that only specified users can edit and insert new data. And I want to collect and discover the preferences of customers. Okay, so that's what we're going to look at again. Okay, let's go back to the first, and I'll take your lead. Okay, so what can people say about this? Imagine yourself sitting round on a Monday morning in some trendy part of Shoreditch, in your Scrum meeting, and you've been paid ridiculous amounts of money to think about doing this project. You're some part of it. What would you talk? Would you, as a deck of user stories, and I think that's what they're called these days, a deck, because people literally put them on cards, shuffle them. Okay, so what can I have some feedback about? What do you think about these user stories? Is it could you remind me of your name? Resin. Resin, please.
I think each user story is not too big, so they can be actually divided into 2 or 3.
Yes, I agree with you. I think they're too big. Anything else to say?
These user stories are too big.
Yeah, the user stories are too big. They're all big picture stories.
I thought they were supposed to be longer.
So Gideon says, I thought they were meant to be longer. Yes. And now we're talking about 2 different types of size. Okay. So they are describing something that is too big, which is, you know, a bit of development that is, you can't. It's hard to estimate the time for that. The project development time is too big, but I think I would also agree with the point that you're sort of making in opposition to that, which is that they are just headings at the moment. They're too small. I don't have enough detail. Okay, there's not enough detail on there. I mean, thank you, contributors. I realise that you're all busy, and so maybe that is just to come. But you know, we would need to develop each of these with some more detail. So I would also say that there's quite a bit of repetition in those. They haven't really sort of spanned the scope of the project. Okay, so I would say they all look, so 1 looks very similar to 6. Okay, you know, as a developer, I can't see too much difference. Okay. And then then there's an interesting. So you've got some numbers, and you want to put the numbers on the map, okay? And then that's basically the same with 6, except that there's an option to toggle, okay? Which is interesting. And then you've also got 4, which is. It's more data. You know, this is more like data on a map. I mean, it's all. But if I'm going to see which ones are close to each other, number 4 is also close. Except this is not numbers; it's letters. Common law, Napoleonic, that kind of thing. Anarchy. And so, you know, you've got to you know. So I can see a little tree of stories coming here. And so toggling is a sort of advanced, you know, is a higher branch. You all understand what toggling is. In fact, we would probably want to be able to overlay different layers of data, I'm guessing. You know, and 4 and 2 is you know, well, when you think about it, you're not really. I mean, okay, so we're adding up the numbers, but do we really want to? Do we need the map application to actually do anything with the numbers apart from just present them? If we're just going to present them, then let's just treat it all as strings. You know, that's the idea. You know, the resulting cumulative population, maybe the user's going to provide that as well. So he's got a figure for Europe that says a certain number, and so that's just a string that goes on Europe. Okay, so I would say that we should concentrate on some key stories and then sort of develop some detail off that. I think there's some really important detail about the project missing from this. So as a developer, I don't yet know how to do this. Can anybody help me here? What detail is really importantly missing? Jake.
The ability to plot individual points on a map or plot sort of widespread areas like countries or continents.
Do you mean Zoom? No. Okay. So I think Jake's saying it would be nice just to put an individual data item on a map. I think, is that right?
Oh, yeah.
Is just one thing, one bit of data, and it goes manually to the thing. That's an interesting thing. I don't know whether this is a zoomable map or not. That, as a developer, that's what I'd first be worried about. How am I going to handle this? And so that would be the thing that I would sort of. Do I need to be able to make this like a Google map? But even more importantly, would anybody like to say anything else? Yes, Deborah.
I think the best way to do this would be having use cases. For example, as a developer, you tell me view maps, then explain like what exactly the user wants to see when they particularly look at that use case. And so if you develop based on your use case and create user stories, that'll help you to define basically what. As a developer, that'll help me to define what you want me to do.
Okay, so there's an echo of a previous comment there, which is that user stories can be developed from use cases, and so that's maybe we're just talking about the headings of the user stories. Maybe we can develop from that. But I'm picking up something from you that I haven't actually thought of before, and that's also it's different to what I was thinking of. But I think it's also very important about this is that all of these user stories are about making the map, putting the data on the map, and none of them are about viewing it. Okay, and so that's I would say probably the most important deficiency in these set of user stories is that they are all about creating the map, and none of them are about using the map, the data on the map. Yeah, it's lovely to make this thing where you've got numbers and law and pictures and everything, but we really need to concentrate on how this is going to be used by the traveller's relatives, the law teachers' students, this kind of thing. No, but the thing that I was thinking of, that I think is completely missing here, is and maybe this would be teased out by those stories, I suppose, is what's the medium here? Is it just a desktop application? Is it a web? Is this a web application? I don't know yet. So as a developer, I don't know whether this is a web application or just a standalone desktop application, and that's really important. And my although my area of expertise is not particularly web, must be abundantly clear to your generation that you would do well to make sure that you are sort of well versed in technology that uses that medium. To use about 20 words when 3 would probably. So we must get the web in there somehow. Yeah. A blogger, I suppose. A blogger is a web blogger. That's the only. Right. Recipe map. We don't really have a set of user stories, so we can't really subject this to the same level of critical analysis here. So what we can do is try and make some. And I think And so if I sort of go like this and go like this, we go here. So what have we got? We've got, I would say first of all, just add a recipe to the map. So what have we got? We've got, this is a standard CRUD landscape, isn't it? CRUD? Anybody can tell me what CRUD stands for? Pretty good. I've heard at least 3 voices there. Create, read, update, and delete. Yeah. So we've got create, 1. Add single recipe to map by explicitly giving key ingredients. Entering quantities of key ingredients. And so we're really giving it on a plate to ourselves here, if you pardon the expression. You've got, so we all want amount of flour, amount of fat per 100 grams, amount of flour, amount of, what was the other one? Sugar per 100 grams of flour. And so we have to do all the hard work. The recipe application is extremely lazy. It just wants to just take these numbers, put them in a database, and then just show something using those numbers. And so as a user, I would feel pretty peeved about this user interface because I have to do so much hard work. But as a developer, I'm very excited about this because I reckon I can get this up and running in about 2 days. And so that's a nice kind of, entry-level user story so we can get going. Okay? Next one. Let's stick with the creates. We're having fun. Add single recipe by, let's put them out there. By pasting in a list of ingredients taken from a PDF recipe. So it's going to do a bit of hard work here. It's going to say, it's going to try and find those numbers and do the work itself. I'm going to say keywords named. And we can say C3 is same as C2, but with variations in naming, e.g. honey rather than sugar. Because if we've got a honey cake, we still want it to be, that would be one of the things I'd want to show off in my demo. Okay? So just pause this for a minute. Just think more generally think about your demo. It'll be in maybe the first or second week of May, or the last week of April, or the first week of May. You'll have about 20 minutes. You'll have 10 minutes where you're the boss. You have 10 minutes when they're asking you questions about how you did it. So you've got 10 minutes to really show off what you've done. And so you want to use those 10 minutes to just make sure that the assessor and the supervisor know that this is a first-class project. Okay? And so, showing C1 would make me think, well, this is a 2-2, might be it might scrape to a 2-1. Let's have a look at the documentation. Showing C2 would make me think, this is a C, this is a 2-2, this is an upper second, a B grade in new money. Might be an A, depending on how good the documentation is. If they can show me C3, I'm thinking, unless they've really mapped up the documentation, this is the first. Okay. So try, but you should still start off at C1. How we doing? And then you've got C4, which is where it gets really interesting. We're now enterprise territory, which is user, add all recipes containing flour that can be accessed using the food to fork API. So food to fork is a portal, recipe portal, a bit like TripAdvisor but for food. And then you can, it's got loads of recipes, but there's an API. You can go and get those recipes. A computer can go and read those recipes if it's feeling hungry. And so that means that a computer can just go and get all those recipes, and it could find all the ones that contain flour, find out how much fat, how much sugar they are, put them all up on that lovely map, and there we go. You've got 1,000 recipes up there. Okay, next one, you've got read one. And to be honest, I don't, user views map containing all recipes. Each recipe is shown as a dot. How are we going to do this? You need to sort of selecting the dot brings up the title and source of the recipe with links on web. With links to the source. R2, then there's variations we can talk about here. We can talk about changing the axes. Let's look at salt, not sugar, that kind of thing. Changing the axes, salt. But I think, that's what, I will develop these user stories in conjunction with the project students. But I'm not going to sort of do it all right now because it's becoming less interesting for everybody else. Let's go back to the beer mat, talk about that. No, that's not that. Here we go. Beer mat. Right, any feedback on these user stories? Mohammed, Ibrahim? It's good? You're good? Okay, so my opening remark about these user stories would be, can anyone predict what am I going to say? Go on, have a go.
The structure from the Wikipedia link.
The structure from the. Well, no, okay. I'm saying a word of warning. Yeah, I want to see some detail. You can't just fob me off with a desire. I'd like to see a bit more detail. That's not what I would say. This is all about the project owner. This is all about the project owner. It's clear as day. It's sort of the first 4 words of each story as a project owner. Okay, and so I'd say, look, this is not. These are not project owner stories. What are they called again? Yes, and so I would like, if you're going to use that framework for, that template, I would like some starting off as a user, okay? And so I guess we would like to differentiate the data owner, or the beer mat owner and the project owner. So that's something that needs to be done, The project owner wants the system to be stable and adequate, I suppose, in storing data, and but the beer mat owner wants to be able to collect and discover preferences of customers through reporting, and make and informed decisions. I'd like to differentiate that between the person responsible for the application and the person that the owner of the actual artifact at the end that will use this. But even then, it's not about the user. It's we need to computer scientists are often criticized for not being user-centered or user-facing. We're all about kind of how can we use this new technology? I've got some new technology in my pocket. It's a phone that does this, that, or the other. How can I use this in my project rather than let's think about a user need that can be satisfied. Okay, and so I guess it's I would want to see here. I'm very happy with. I'm not going to include the project owner at all. This is not user stories. He's out. Sorry, mate. You can write your own stories. This is about the beer mat owner, and really they want to update one manual. Manual insertion. Of beer item manual. It sounds great, doesn't it? I've got to rephrase that. Add beer description with description. To beer mats. You too. Add list of beers with descriptions. And so we can say what we mean by that. It's an Excel file, it's a comma-separated value text file. It's got a beer, and then it's got some words, a hoppy, flowery fragrance in this Kent, blah blah blah. And so our wonderful little bit of business logic is going to go and take these words and find out which beers are similar to each other. Then you've got what else have we got? We've got someone who wants to read the beer mat. So R1. So just user. What are they? Customer views beer mat to find similar beers to their favourite beer. So they really like a particular beer. They go, oh, that's Smuggler's Delight or something. Go in and find it. And they go, oh, look around there. There's a couple of ones that are similar, and then we can maybe extend that. So what we've got at the end of that R1 is that when we're eating our pizza on the Friday afternoon, we show the man the code, and he says, look, so Smuggler's Delight, put it in, and look, you can see that next to that there's Autumn Glory and something else. Great. We can show these beers that we know that are quite similar to that beer. They're showing similar on the map. It's slightly unsatisfying as a user story because nothing tangible has changed about the world. There's no order that's been dispatched. There's no email that's been sent. It's all still a little bit kind of just. It's all happened in people's minds, which is perhaps all that's needed, but it's not easily verifiable. And so we could add another one to that, which is R2. We could say as R1. But with but customer then saves nearby beers to their wish list. And so from that moment on, they will be receiving emails, about 4 emails a day, saying, why don't you buy this? Why don't you buy this? And that's a good thing. No, so they've got something. There's a wish list, and now they've got their favourite beers. They've got some similar beers, and so it's like Amazon do this. Customers that bought this will also buy that, but we're just looking to see, what's similar. And then you've got other things as well, which is that there's an update 3 we can call this maybe. Update 3, beer drinker. Finds favourite beer. Then uses control to suggest similar beers. Remember, this was about beer makers and their preference and their, what they think is similar, or what turns out to be similar given their descriptions. That's the beer makers, but we've also got the beer drinkers, and so this is really another update story. So beer drinker finds favourite beer on beer mat. And so, that might be the core set of stories, I would suggest. It's something you could work with. This is what I was going to use if we didn't have any others. So thank you very much, project students, for volunteering that. Your contributions are valued. This is an idea that I'm just exploring really with the university. See if it's useful. I mean, we can get this sort of teaching assistants. They're sometimes underused in the workshops, but then it seems that that's not the only time they're needed. And so maybe you could have some kind of virtual assistant where you kind of request help. It's a bit like a kind of help desk portal, but hopefully you could gamify it and make it more fun. You could even read that as well. Amazing. And so this is what I would. This would be a simple project description, and then I've given some slides there that would be where I would be starting if I was going to write some user stories. What have I got? I've got S for the student, so I've got 5 stories that I would try and do. In-lab assistance requested online. Got in-lab assistance requested in person, and that's a sort of slightly tricky one. I'm trying to capture all help that's given by everybody to everybody. Maybe that's just gets in the way in a lab, but just going to help you. We can talk about what you don't understand. We don't actually have to write anything down anywhere. So that's a tricky one, S2, and then you've got offline and online text-based assistants. Okay, I'd say they're your kind of in fact S1 is also online, so you can't see anybody to help. You just say, I'm in the lab, help, I got this compile error, this is what it says. Somebody zooms in and just replies with text, like a little instant messenger thing, saying that I think it's like this. And so you can carry on in the lab. That's what S1 is about. But then S3 and S4 are all about when you are away somewhere else. Maybe it's 3 o'clock in the morning, you write something, you get, and then about 5 minutes later, somebody else happens to be awake as well. They see that this is a problem. They know that they can get some small remuneration for helping you in your hour of need, and so you get a little reply. And then S4 is even, an online chat environment. And then S5 is where it gets a bit more chunky, technically speaking. We're talking about audio and remote control. So you say, let me have a look. Look, it says you haven't set up your project correctly. I'll do it like this, and then it's all working. And so those are the sort of they're the student started stories. The student does something, and then this system helps. And then the H ones are for the helper started stories. And so the assistant indicates they are available to the system. So I'm a PhD student, I'm busy writing some interesting publication, but I'm trying to put it off. And so I indicate that I'm available to help students, and then sure enough, I get little messages pop up. But I don't mind because I like helping people, but also I get paid a little bit for each bit of help that I do. And so just toggling that on and off is H1 and H2, and then H3 and H4 are about, actually enrolling people so I'm as a module leader, I would want to sort of enroll people to help on my module. These might be paid postgraduates, or they might be undergraduates that are keen and looking to kind of develop their portfolio, their CV, and you know, if they're very helpful, then I would maybe use some of my budget to pay them to continue helping. And then you've got sort of, I don't know what T stands for. I suppose this is the sort of manager view summary of help. The teacher one, that's it. Teacher one and teacher two. And so, you know, for this, you know, I would actually quite like to get that project rolling. I don't know whether it would be helpful. I would actually appreciate your feedback on this as a little bit of, you know, if anybody wants to, you know, send me their thoughts, you know, my email, it's just james@kingston.ac.uk. But if I was actually going to try and start that development process, then would be my initial set of stories, and that would get refined as we discuss exactly what the priority is. You know, and I think, you know, S2 is the real tricky one, because I don't know whether it's useful to try and catch that in lab person-to-person interaction in our system, or do we just let that happen anyway and we say, well, this is everything else. Right, I've got to the end of my slides. Is there any more things that anyone would like to talk about? Any more questions? So I hear your silence and take it as a no. Thank you very much for being so attentive. Thank you once again for people contributing that content. And I'll see you, Programming 3 students, tomorrow, yes? For yet more early module feedback and some, you know, more programming. Thank you very much.